Okay, what we have here is a 2006 Yamaha Wave Runner VX Deluxe. It's a 110. I had picked this up. It was needed some things. I painted it, put a new graphics kit on it. It needed some pump work. The impeller wheeled itself off the rear shaft and was making a lot of racket, so I had to replace the wear ring. It was actually holding up the motor, but everything looks good. I mean, it runs perfect, fires right up, idle's excellent, no misses, nothing. The only problem is we took it out on the river yesterday and probably sat for about an hour, and I noticed the hull was getting a little low in the water. Well, I pulled the seat off, and there was a lot of water inside the ski. Headed back to the dock. By the time we got back to the dock, most of the water was out from the onboard suction pump that works off the jet drive system. It sucked all the water out. But what I found was down inside here, is where the coupler is for the drive shaft. And I already pulled the top portion off. Right here, there's a aluminum cover with 4 bolts. You can see one of them broke in the bottom. So what I'm going to have to do is figure out whether the water is coming through the bearing and through the seal, or whether it's coming around that rubber bushing that basically it's part of the clamping mechanism. It encases the bearing and the seals and everything. For some reason, I'm thinking it might not be coming through the bearing and the bearing seal itself, but it might be coming around the rubber part on the top. But I have to pull it all apart, and we're going to check it out. I have another shaft and coupler that I'm going to replace what I already have in there with. It's another shaft out of another ski. And I have the top part. You can actually buy a kit on eBay where they'll sell you this bottom part, this top part, and a tube of 3M 5200 sealant. And a lot of times what happens, there's 3 things that I know about these skis that happen. The water will either leak in underneath this, around here somewhere. So this would have to be pulled off and resealed underneath with the 5200. Or the water is going in through the seal where the bearing is and then pouring out the front of the bearing. What I have here is an engine hoist. And what I did is I used a length of cable, and I folded it over. And in the loop in the front, I put a hook. And then the 2 other pieces I ran to the back. And I use this on all my Yamahas because they all have some sort of ear here to mount hooks to lift the motor out. Every one I've ever worked on. So I hook it like that, and then this lifts it up, and then because of the cable, I can actually teeter the motor back and forth. The cable will slide along this. I know some people use chains and whatnot, and it'll get hung up on this, and it makes it harder to maneuver it. But this way seemed to work good for me. So what I already did is I took that top piece off, and again I busted the one bolt. So I would not suggest trying to do this unless you have the parts. Like if you plan on doing this whole job in one day and you don't have the parts to do it, the extra parts, like you can buy that kit where it comes with the top piece, the bottom piece, and a tube of sealant. If you don't have that with you, you may bust the bolt and you're going to have to order it and then wait. So try to have the parts ready. You could probably heat these bolts off, but with all the rubber and the fiberglass and everything down inside there, I don't know. I wouldn't use a torch in there, but you know, it could be oil, fuel, whatever laying in the hull. If you don't clean it out real good, things could catch on fire, and that wouldn't be a good thing. You might be able to use a heat gun. We're going to have to use a heat gun later on, but that's not an open flame, so it's a little bit safer. And for what people tell me, Yamaha charges, like at a dealership, between $700 to $1,000 to do this. And you could buy the kit on eBay. I don't remember the number on it, but it's a VX repair kit. It was like $109. The guy sells you both parts and the 5200, the 3M 5200. And the 3M 5200 that you'll get is this. They make a 4200, which I also have. If you're ever doing pump work and you want to reseal the pump, you can use 4200 or the back plate that goes up against the hull. Sometimes they leak over time, you know, back inside there, and you can use 4200 to seal that up and everything. And the 5200, once it cures, it's, I don't know, it's near impossible getting it off. 4200, you can actually get it off with some elbow grease. But all right, I'm going to get set up here, get the tools I need, and going to get rocking on this. All right, the first thing you have to do, you'll see the coupler inside there. Kind of looks like two hands joined together there. That mates the motor to the drive shaft. There's usually a little cover on there, a little plastic cover, and I think it's a little 10 millimeter or an 8 millimeter bolt. You'll see there's like a little ear sticking off, and that bolt, you got to take that off to get that plastic cover off. But this ski didn't come with one, so I'm going to skip that. And then you could see those bolts. I already had wheeled them out earlier, and I put the coupling bearing cover back on there just to show you. But those are 12 millimeter bolts. There are 4 of them. I used my impact, was able to wheel 3 of them out, and then the 4th one, I had to use, my impact wouldn't get it, so I had to use a long extension with a 12 millimeter, and I just busted it off because I have new parts anyway that I'm going to put on there that I already cleaned up. And but if you want to reuse your parts, you're going to have to figure out some other way to get those bolts. If they don't come off like easily with a little drill or something or a little impact, most likely they're going to break. So what you should do is either heat them up or, you know, I don't know what you're going to do, but I would just buy new parts. And this way you know that you know, the day that you do this, you'll be able to do it. And it doesn't take that long to do this. If I wasn't filming it, I could do this probably in just over an hour. It's not a very difficult process. But what you're going to do is get those 12 millimeter bolts off. Once you do that, pull the bolts out. Now these are the bolts, the 3 that I had taken out originally. You could see all the corrosion on there. I mean, even if you soak these, or I just, with all the threads clogged up like that, you know, it just would be very difficult to get them out either way. So again, I would buy new parts, but that's up to you. Okay, next I'm going to take the exhaust out. There is a clamp here, and there's a clamp back there, and then there's one all the way in the back. You can't really see it here, but it's back there. It's a little bit of a pain to get off. You can see it right above my fingernail. No, that's not it. There it is down there. It's a little bit of a pain to get all this stuff out. You might want to get this out of the way so you don't break it. Just cut the zip tie and push it off to the side. I'm probably going to do that so I don't break any of these flanges off here. That is essential. If I didn't have that on this ski would have sunk. This is part of the, it goes down to that little box down there. And when you're driving, when you're riding, the jet pump actually sucks water out from the hull through that, up through this. And that's the only thing that saved this ski. This does not have an electric pump like the higher end models. This is just a cheap, you know, price point ski from the time. And it does not have an electronic pump. It just has that little gray box down there that attaches to that tube, and it's a suction pump. And it works off the jet drive. I'll probably show you how that works. If there's anybody that is going to have a sinking ski, right at the top, right here, this one actually is loose and pull right out. But yeah, that goes inside the pump, and as the water is flying, being pushed past this, it actually sucks water from the hull through here and ejects it out the jet drive, for anybody that doesn't know. Another thing is I always just tape off these Yamaha sprayers in the back. I don't know, to me, it's just robbing the pump of a little extra force, and it really doesn't do anything other than let everybody know you're riding a Yamaha, and it doesn't allow people to follow too close behind you because they'll get water in their face. But I disconnected it. All right, so I'm going to get this air box out. I mean this exhaust box out, and I'll be back. Okay, I got those clamps loose. You kind of got to use two hands because the whole thing wants to lift up. Alright, so I got the upper tube off. Now you can see that other clamp behind there. We're going to get that off now. Alright, so the main box is out there, that baffle, and then this styrofoam piece just lifts right off of there. Now you can see the whole piece. Now there's three bolts holding this plate down. That's it. Just those little 3 bolts. I think they're 8mm. There's one there. There's one down here, and there's one over there. This comes off. I'm going to take this off. As soon as you get those bolts out, you can take that part off. And this is what you have left here. Those two clamps are going to have to come off, because that rubber sleeve where those two clamps are, that front clamp is where I think this one is leaking, or that other one that I was showing you before. Underneath this clamp here and this rubber sleeve is what clamps to the bearing assembly or the bearing housing, and I think the water is getting between this rubber sleeve and going over the top of the bearing housing and underneath this rubber bushing and coming out the front on that other one. Now this one I don't know yet. Once I get this out and I pour water in the back, if it's pouring out through the bearing, then I know that it's the bearing. If it's not, then it's probably coming over the top, and that all has to be cleaned up, and I don't know, I'll probably put something on there so that it doesn't do it anymore, like some gasket maker or something. I don't know, I'll have to, well, we'll get to that later. So right now those are, those 3 bolts have to come off, and those 2 clamps have to be loosened up. Alright, so I got those bolts out. Really, it's just a little screw. I mean, really, it doesn't really do much. It looks like it just holds that plate down. Probably what they were thinking is once they sealed that plate, that sealant would hold that plate down, and this really just held it there until the sealant dried and compressed the sealant down. But you got to be careful when you put these back in that you do not over tighten them, because if they, you over tighten it, it's gonna strip the fiberglass out. And I mean, they don't really do much as far as strength in holding it. It really just holds the that plate in place while the sealant dries, but it's not good to strip these out. And I actually use the 5/16 on a drill, the same one I use for the clamps. I use the 5/16, and they came right out. So I guess they're 8mm, but 5/16 works. So the next thing we're gonna do is I gotta pull the motor forward. Oh, here's another clamp here on the exhaust on this side. That's gonna have to come off. That guy right there. Just loosen it up, and when you pull the motor forward, that should pull out of here. You might have to work it a little bit, but it'll come out. What we're going to do next is start pulling what we need to off the front of the motor here. There's the fuel line right here. That's going to have to come off. Make sure you disconnect the battery before you start messing around with any of this stuff. And also what I would do is take the fuel cap off. Take the fuel fill cap off over there. Because if there's pressure inside the tank as you're working, if you start in the morning and then it heats up during the day, gas is just going to start pouring out of there from the pressure, from the heat buildup. So you want to disconnect the battery, and you want to take this hose off, and you want to strap it up high or stick something in there, and then clamp the clamp back down on it like a bolt, and just zip tie it out of the way or string it out of the way. And another thing we're going to do is we got to take this. We got to take the intake box out. This box right here, it's going to have to come out. So we got to take this tube off. Right here, this clamp, that clamp down there. Got to pull all these wires off. I'm thinking the last time I did this, I did not have to remove this ECU. I think I was able to just slide the motor up far enough and tilt it to the side where I could pull that shaft out without taking this out. But we'll see when we get to that. So right now I'm going to go ahead and try to get this air box out. and we'll continue. It took me a few minutes to get them out. These have probably been out before. That's what they look like. Make sure you pull these washers off the top. When you pull the bolt out, there's going to be a washer sitting on the top. If they're not there, then somebody probably had your motor out before and forgot to put them back in. But there's that. There's 4 of these. And then underneath, once you lift the motor up, there'll be these little fork-shaped spacers that are underneath each one. Sometimes there'll be 2. A lot of times in the front, I've seen where there's 2, which they basically had to raise the front of the motor up to get the coupler aligned properly. But these bolts came out pretty easy, and I'm going to go ahead now and lift the motor and slide it forward, and that shaft should slide right out. I should be able to get it to maneuver past the motor. But let me get it jacked up, and we'll see. Oh, and I think I said that was the ECU in the corner. That is the fuse box. The ECU is actually right down here on the side of the motor. So just making that correction. All right, we're going to go ahead and lift the motor up. Okay, here's the spacers that are underneath there. I don't know if there's thickness differences or whether they're all the same, and then they just add an extra one if they need to raise or lower the motor, to get it lined up with the coupler. But this one had just one of these on each one. I put each one where it came off, another one in the front, and this one came over here. So I'm just going to leave them where they came from, and we'll put them right back in there the way they came out. But I already started lifting the motor up, and now I can move the motor around inside there. So you can see I already slid it forward pretty far, and I can actually lift this up a little bit. So what I'm going to have to do is I got to get this bushing out here, or this coupling, and then I'm going to push the motor up even further and tilt it to its side, and that I should be able to slide that out. I'm pretty sure that's how I did it the last time, so I'm going to do it again. Make sure you got those wires out of the fuse box and out of the way. Make sure you pull the wires out of that fuse box, all these wires, and then there's another one that comes off the fuse box that connects over here. Make sure you get these clips off so that they don't break, and then you can move the motor forward. Alright, I jacked the motor up, and I sort of teetered it forward on my cables. I just lift up on the back of the motor, and it slid up and over. So I was able to get the back up high enough. And now there's that little hose in the way, but you can slide this underneath. And out she comes. I heard some things dropping down in there. I don't know what that was, but oh, looks like the bearing dropped out. So this is the problem on here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this sleeve off, and those were actually, when I was pulling this out, ball bearings dropped right out of my shaft. So okay, so I went ahead and I got this piece out of the ski. This is what was in there. All right, what I did was I used I have a Porter cable heat gun with a variable temperature, and I put it pretty much all the way, and I just heated up this top edge over here, like down the side. Just kept going like this, and it did that, I don't know, maybe for about a minute. Got it really nice and hot. You want to get this like where you can't touch it, super hot. And just keep going back and forth. And then what I did is I used this scraper, and I was able to get it underneath the edge and tapped it in, and it cut through the glue, and I got it in. I went this way as far as I can go, and I went down as far as I can go, just to break this edge and get the glue loose here and try to teeter it up a little bit. And then I use this little tool. I was able to get it underneath, and then I wedged the front of this up, and it lifted up, and then it just peels right up. You don't really even have to heat it up down here or really far down here or anywhere else. You know, you get that top broken loose, and it would peel right up. But when I took these clamps off, there's a lot of corrosion on there. So this is another place where the water can get in. You can have a leak around this. It definitely was leaking. You can see how bad it's corroded. And here's the bearing side. It definitely was corroded. Water was definitely getting around that ring there, that sleeve. And that goes just like this. And that sleeve with the two clamps join these two pieces together. So I was definitely getting water in through there. But this was the main problem. You can see this thing just came right off. I just pulled it right out, like it dropped right off the shaft. And there's where your bearing is, or at least one of them. I guess maybe there's two in there. Probably, thinking there's two. But this one will have to be, this has to be pressed off. Now, if you do want to change your bearings, you're going to have to mark this where this front bearing is, and you're going to want to press the new bearing on right to that mark. You know, because otherwise this stuff's not going to line up right. You want to make sure that's pressed in. I don't do this myself. If I'm going to change bearings, I go to a shop and do it, and let them do it. Sometimes they'll tell me because of the scoring and whatnot, they won't do it if it's real bad. And then other times they'll say, yeah, that's no problem. So I don't do this often enough. If I went and bought a press, I'm sure I can. But in order to press this off, you'd have to make some kind of thing that clamped on there on both sides. And, you know, I don't have time for that. But this is the old one. It actually looks like it's in decent shape. I might change the bearings on this and just keep it as a, for the next project. You could also see where this was on there. I kind of cleaned it up a little bit, but you see how all the corrosion pimpled this? You know, that sits in there. So, I mean, there was water all over the place. It was coming in from everywhere. Even underneath where the old adhesive was, you can see all the corrosion. The water just flows right through that corrosion and goes right out the edges. So I probably was getting water in from there too. But for the most part, when I was looking in there, when it was in the water, you know, your coupler would be right here. You can see, I mean, water was pouring in, just squirting in from the front and the back. I could see water was coming out of the back. So I had a pretty good idea that the bearings were shot on this. But if you're going to do it, do the whole thing. Take this plate off, clean it up. Here's the one I'm going to put on there. It's an older one, but it's in good shape. I cleaned it up. Make sure you clean this real good around here. And the bottom, you want to score that with sandpaper. Once you clean it, see all the scratches? You want to scratch it up real good. And then on the inside of the ski, when you scrape all the glue off, you want to do the same as this inside there. I'll show you a picture once I get that all cleaned up in there. I'll show you what it looks like before we put this back on. Alright, so this is what it looks like when all that garbage is scraped off. You can see the 3 pegs, 1, 2, 3, where those bolts go in. And all that stuff pretty much just scrapes right off with a scraper when you heat it up good enough. There is one thing. This little piece here came off right in between the 2 front bolt posts, and you might think that that's supposed to stay there, like it looks like something's underneath it, but really it's just a goop of it's just the material that's seeped in underneath that plate in that cavity there, and it looks like it's supposed to stay there. But you got to get this piece out too between those 2 bolts. If you don't, it's not going to seal it right. So heat that up real good and it'll pop right off. And make sure you clean up around those bolt posts, those screw posts real good. So what I'm going to do now is I got all the goop off. I'm going to get in there with the sandpaper, and I'm going to sand all that down real good. Get it nice and clean. If there's any oil or anything on there, you know, you probably should clean it off with some kind of like lacquer, something to, or some kind of paint thinner or alcohol. Just something that's not oil based to clean that surface, and then sand it down real good, and then we'll be ready for sealant. All right. So I got the whole thing covered. You don't want to get any inside there. You just want to get it wherever it's going to touch. Wherever the surface is going to touch. I also put some on the towers down below. I didn't goop it in up here. I put it on the towers down below, because if you goop it in here, it's going to squeeze out the bolt holes on the top, and then you're going to get it on those screws that go in, and it's actually going to lubricate them going in, and you probably have a higher tendency of stripping them out. So I don't know, something's going to get on there anyway, but I just put it around the base of the towers. And really the important thing is to be around this shaft, where the shaft goes through. You got to be around there to really seal this thing up. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on, put the bolts in, and we'll continue. Alright, if you got enough stuff on there, which it appears that I do, you'll see the goop come out around all the edges. So I got it sealed down good. If you don't see goop come out around the edges before you put the screws in, just peel it off and then add more. And once you tighten those screws, you should see it oozing out. Again, don't over tighten those screws because they will strip. Alright, so now I'm going to put my new shaft back in place. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little RTV on this right here, this right here, all the way around. I'm going to actually put it on that little rubber, coupling, and I'm going to, before I slide the shaft in and tighten those clamps, because I don't want the water leaking around that anymore. Hopefully the RTV will slow it down, but Probably don't need it as long as you clean it up good, but I'm going to put it on anyway. I don't think it'll hurt. Okay, I got the shaft back in. You do it the same as the way you took it out. You slide the shaft assembly back underneath the motor, and then you come in. Make sure you come in straight, because that shaft, the end of the shaft where it connects into the impeller, if you don't go in straight, that shaft is going to go alongside the impeller on the outside of the impeller. And when you get this thing all back together and you fire it up, you're going to hear a god-awful noise, and you're going to wonder what you did wrong. And most likely what it is the shaft is on the outside of the impeller. It did not slide into the impeller. And if you can ruin up the teeth, you can ruin the teeth on your shaft, and you're going to have to file them back down so that you can get it in. If you do get this all back together, and that does happen, just pull the pump off the back. Pull the impeller off the back, and you're going to have to clean it up and everything from in there. You can use a file. I've seen it happen. I've had these come in with that problem. So make sure that when you slide this in there, you turn the coupler, and you'll hear the prop in the back. You'll feel it when it's in there. Or you can turn this and have somebody look back there and make sure the prop is spinning. But this is definitely in. Already checked it. And leave everything loose. Don't tighten those clamps or put that top piece of aluminum on there with those 4 bolts yet. You want to lower the motor down, get the motor placed, and then you want to make sure that you adjust this this shaft so it's not sticking too far towards the back of the boat. You want to make sure you align it up properly. So I'm going to lower the motor down. I'm going to get the 2 couplers back together. I'm going to put the motor mounts back in with the shims, and then we'll proceed from there. All right, so here's the 3 bolts. Here's 3 bolts that came out of this ski. Here's a 4th one that I have broken it. But see all the gunk on those bolts? And this one came out of another ski, but it had Loctite on it right there. So what we got to do is clean all these off with the wire brush and put a little dab of red Loctite at the bottom. It's showing put Loctite, so I'm gonna put it. All these have it. I can see red on the bottom of all these, so I'm gonna clean these up on the wire wheel, and we're gonna put a little Loctite on them, and then they go right in this top plate here. So that's my next move. The motor's in, motor mounts are all tight. One other thing, you got to watch your gap on this. This here, I forget what the specs are, but now that I'm looking at it, I'm probably a little bit too close here. I'm going to have to move the motor back a little bit. Yep, I'm going to have to loosen the motor mount bolts and move that back a little bit, because I believe that gap is supposed to be a little bit wider than that. I think like 1/8 of an inch or something. And you'll know that this coupling is good. You run your finger along it, and it should be smooth from one coupler to the other on all the sides. If it's sticking out on one side and sticking in on the other side, you'll have to adjust the motor so that it's not doing that. So I'm just going to loosen the bolts up. I'm going to slide that out a little bit. First, I'm going I'm going to fix this shaft and coupler, or the coupler bearing, mid-shaft bearing, so it doesn't move around at all. And I know I got a precise spacing. So I'm going to get working on that. Alright, now you can see the spacing is a lot better. See that? You want to keep them apart a little bit, so that's good. I got my 4 bolts in there, Loctited, tighten my 2 clamps, and she should be good to go. Just going to clean all that debris out. Got to hook some of these clamps back up. Got to put the exhaust back in. Get the air box. Hook all that stuff back up. I mean, that stuff's easy. I'm not going to continue the video on that. But just, again, make sure that when you put this shaft back in, that it's inside that prop, that it slides through and into the prop. Because if you don't, you're going to have problems. You can ruin the shaft. Hope this video helps. Have a good 4th of July.